Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to provide you with an update as to what's happening in the economy in Turkey and why, despite recent improvements in some of the data, the overall situation remains extremely serious because Turkey is currently dealing with a combination of very high inflation, a weakening currency, rising costs for businesses, and extremely high interest rates. And now, on top of all of that, we've got the added pressure of rising energy prices linked to the conflict in Iran, which is particularly problematic for Turkey as it relies heavily on imported energy. So this is a complex situation and one that is constantly evolving. But before we get into the details of all of that, could I ask anybody that hasn't subscribed yet to please hit that subscriber button? It really helps me with the YouTube algorithm and also puts a smile on my face. Now let's start with inflation, and for anybody that's been missing the graphs, you can see that the graphs are back. Hooray! Because inflation is at the heart of Turkey's economic challenges. The latest data shows that inflation in March over the past 12 months is now running at 30.9%. Now that is an incredibly high rate of inflation. If you compare that to most countries in the West that might have 2 or 3%, then 30.9 is off the scale. Now, if we look at what's happened over the last 12 months, you can see that things are actually moving in the right direction compared to where they have been. But let's be absolutely clear. Inflation at 30% remains one of the highest rates anywhere in the world. Within the G20, only Argentina has a current higher rate at around 33%. And globally, the only countries with higher rates of inflation than Argentina are Venezuela, where inflation is currently sitting at more than 600%, South Sudan, where it's over 110%, and Iran, where it's now at 48%. But a lot of those figures are actually out of date. We don't have the latest data, so they're sort of guesstimates, I guess. So Turkey is firmly in the group of economies dealing with seriously high rates of inflation. Now, it's really important to understand why inflation matters, because I think a lot of people just think, oh, inflation's so boring, stop talking about inflation. But it's not just a number on a chart, it has real world consequences. When inflation is high, the cost of living rises rapidly, wages rarely keep pace, and savings lose value. So effectively, inflation acts like a hidden tax. It reduces your purchasing power and creates uncertainty across the whole economy, because households and businesses can't plan properly when prices are constantly rising, particularly when they're rising at 30% per year. It also distorts behaviour. People tend to spend more quickly before prices rise further, businesses struggle to price their products, and long-term investment decisions become much more difficult. So overall, high inflation is deeply disruptive and damaging to an economy, particularly when it persists for long periods of time. Now, if we widen the chart to look at what's been happening over the past 5 years, this is where the real scale of the problem in Turkey becomes clear. Turkey hasn't just experienced a short burst of inflation like we all did following the COVID-19 pandemic, when the world suddenly came out of lockdown, everybody started spending, and prices went sky high for a relatively short time. Turkey has endured high levels of inflation for a long period. We saw peaks above 80% in 2022 and levels above 60% for prolonged periods in 2024. And the key point here is that inflation is cumulative. It compounds over time. So if something costs $1 5 years ago, now after all of that inflation in Turkey, that item is going to cost around about $5. So that represents a huge loss of purchasing power for individuals and companies in Turkey. And this is why many people feel worse off even if their incomes have increased, because prices have risen much faster than wages. Now, if we look at specifically what's been going on with food inflation, this is currently sitting at 32.4%, which is similar to where it was 12 months ago. And 32.4% is actually higher than the general rate of inflation. And this is critically important because food inflation disproportionately affects lower income households. The reason for that is simple. Poorer people spend a higher percentage of their income on food. So when food prices rise sharply, wealthier households can generally absorb that increase, but poorer households cannot. That means people are forced to cut back, reduce consumption, and in some cases struggle to afford even basic necessities, basically putting food on the table. Over the last 5 years, food prices in Turkey have risen dramatically, you can see from the shape of the graph. And compared to the rest of the world, Turkey sits right at the top of the table in terms of food inflation. So this isn't just an economic issue, it's a social issue in Turkey as well. Now, if we move on to producer prices, which are also referred to as factory gate prices, these are currently rising at 28% per year, which is higher than the level we were seeing a year ago. So the things are getting worse in terms of the factory gate prices in Turkey. Now, obviously, Turkish producers have to pass on cost increases. So when prices are generally rising by 30%, they're going to have to increase their prices by broadly that figure. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And this is really important for Turkey because Turkey is a manufacturing economy. It relies heavily on producing goods and exporting them to generate growth. That's how it gets some of its GDP. So when producer prices rise, the cost of manufacturing increases. Businesses then have two choices. Either they absorb those higher costs, which reduces their profits and their profit margins, or they pass them directly onto consumers, which pushes inflation higher and also runs the risk of selling less product because your prices are going up. But there's another critical issue here, which is competitiveness. If Turkish producers are facing rising costs, then their goods become relatively more expensive compared to competitors from other countries. And that makes it harder for Turkey to export, harder to earn foreign currency, and harder to grow its economy. So rising producer prices are a serious structural problem in Turkey. Now let's turn to the Turkish lira, because this is one of the biggest challenges facing the economy. As you can see from this chart, over the past 12 months, the lira has continued to weaken significantly. This chart compares the value of the US dollar against the lira, and 1 year ago, $1 would buy you around 38 lira. Today, it's closer to 45. And if we expand the scale of this chart to look at the last 5 years, the exchange rate 5 years ago was $1 to 7.5 lira. Now it's 45. That is a dramatic devaluation. Now, in theory, a weaker currency can actually help your exports because it makes your goods cheaper to foreign buyers. But that isn't the most important thing, because from Turkey's perspective, the situation's far more complicated as it's a net importer, particularly of energy products. So when the lira weakens, imports, which are priced in US dollars or euros, become more expensive, energy costs rise, and that feeds directly into higher inflation. And there's also a major issue for households because most people in Turkey are paid in lira. Most savings are held in lira, so as the currency weakens, income and savings lose purchasing power. And this isn't a one-off event, it's happening continuously, month after month, year after year. And that's why many people in Turkey have moved towards holding foreign currencies instead of lira. But that creates another problem because it reduces confidence in the domestic currency and makes it harder for the central bank to stabilise the system. Now let's take a look at what's been going on with interest rates, because everybody is interested in what the cost of borrowing is. The central bank has responded to inflation by raising interest rates to very high levels. That's the traditional way of dealing with it. When inflation's high, if you increase interest rates, it discourages people from borrowing and therefore reduces spending and should bring demand down, and therefore prices come back down. That's the theory. Interest rates are currently sitting at 37%. However, if we look at the history, you can see that they've had some of the highest interest rates in the world over the past few years, up to 50%. And high interest rates are designed to reduce inflation by slowing down spending and therefore stabilising the currency. But that comes with significant downsides. When borrowing costs are this high, businesses are less likely to invest because they don't want to borrow to do so. Consumers are less likely to take out loans because they're very expensive, and overall economic activity slows down. So while high rates can help bring inflation under control, they also weaken growth. And this leaves Turkey in a very difficult position. If rates remain high, the economy will struggle to grow. If rates are reduced too quickly, then inflation could surge back up to 60 or 70% again. And on top of these domestic challenges, we also have external risks. rising tensions in Iran have pushed global energy prices to record levels. And from Turkey's point of view, this is a major problem because it relies heavily on imported energy, particularly oil and gas. Higher oil and gas prices mean higher import costs, more pressure on the currency, and further increases in inflation. So this external shock is hitting Turkey at exactly the wrong time. So when you bring all of this together, you can see why the situation in Turkey is so serious. Inflation is still extremely high, food prices are hitting households hard, producer costs are rising, the currency continues to weaken, interest rates are restricting growth, and energy prices are rising again. All of these factors are interconnected. A weaker currency drives higher inflation leads to higher interest rates, higher rates slow down the economy, and weaker growth puts further pressure on the currency, and so it goes on. So Turkey is effectively stuck in a very difficult cycle, and breaking out of that cycle is incredibly challenging. So the bottom line is this: the Turkish economy remains in deep trouble. There have been some improvements compared to the worst of the crisis, but the underlying issues have not been resolved. Inflation is still far too high, the currency is still weak, and the external environment is becoming more difficult. With rising energy prices and geopolitical risks adding further pressure, the path forward for Turkey is going to be extremely challenging. And unless there is a sustained improvement in inflation and currency stability, the situation is likely to continue getting worse for some time. So I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments on this story as and when they occur. But hopefully you found today's video useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, or maybe you didn't like it, but you thought it was interesting, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Don't forget, I'm currently running my competition where you can win my property or a cash alternative prize. There's a limited amount of time left on this competition, though it's been going on for a while, but it is a property. So I do need to sell some tickets in order to cover the cost of the property. Not quite got there yet, in fact, quite a long way away. So if you could help out by scanning the QR code on the screen now or clicking the link in the description below, then that'd be great. It's a fun way of helping to fund the channel. Thank you so much to everyone that's helping me in other ways. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, then thank you so much for that support. Really do appreciate it. I'd also like to mention that the Joe and Naz channel is now live. This is a bit of fun. Me and my friend Naz are trying to bring a bit of humour along with some great food reviews and some other exciting things that we're doing. Our latest video is now out. It's just a quick fun one where we actually visited a pub in Camden. So you can check that out. It's one of the best pubs in London. It's called the World's End. So go check that out. Hopefully put a smile on your face. We do need your help because we haven't hit all of the YouTube metrics yet to start getting paid. So we don't get paid anything for our videos. So if you could go over and subscribe to the channel and maybe watch the video just to build up that watch time, that would help us. One thing that YouTube has allowed us to do though is set up a membership scheme and super thanks. So if you're over there and you fancy joining as a member, then please check that out. It should be ready around about now. Or if not, you can give us a super thanks if you like. But anyway, if you can go and help us out, there's a link at the end of today's video. It will take you straight through. If you just click on that, it'll take you straight through to that video. But in the meantime, here is something else to put a smile on your face.